Hello, everybody. We're here today for our Future Florida with the National Endangered Species Day panel. You might know already that the day already passed. It was last week, but we were pretty busy last week, but we wanted to make sure we got to talking about this really important important day today, and sort of how it affects Floridians across the state, climate policy, all that sort of stuff. But I don't want to get too far into it yet. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jack Wallace, and I'm the West Central organizer for our Future Florida. And I'm joined with a bunch of lovely guests here today. But yeah, we have Suhan, as well as Kat, as well as Juan. So we got a whole stack of people here today. If you'd like to, Suhan, if you'd like to start and introduce yourself, I'd appreciate that very much.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Thank you guys so much for the invite. My name is Suhan Rosario. I am the environmental justice organizer at Mi Familia Vota here in Florida. As we know, today's Endangered Species Day. We need to do more to protect our wildlife, our marine life. We haven't been doing enough. As we know now, we have a governor who would prefer to tackle the hurdles of climate change instead of the actual causes. Um, and so we all do need to organize, work together in order to tackle the causes, and then every other problem, for example, like we could help like the animals, we can help the environment, if we tackle the core causes of climate change.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you for being on. We could probably go to Kat next.
Hi, folks. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Kat, and I'm the field organizer for Our Climate Florida. First, want to start off by saying absolutely love and echo everything Suhan had to say. I think it is so important that we address not just the symptoms of climate change, but go deeper and tackle the root of the problem. And that is why our climate helps to mobilize young people around the state to get involved in passing intersectional climate justice policy. We believe in, people-based solutions that are not only, again, about helping out with some of the problems, but like really making sure that when we're addressing these problems, that we're doing it in an equitable way. And we work with policy both at the state and federal level. We also believe that one of the most powerful things that we have as young people in this movement are our stories. So we work a lot with also just tapping into our climate stories and putting real names and faces behind some of the consequences that we're going to be facing of climate change and already are facing.
Awesome, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Juan, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself, I'd appreciate it.
For sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Juan Moore. I'm the South Florida Regional Director for Our Future Florida here in Miami-Dade County, Broward, and West Palm or Palm Beach. And I'm glad to be here. It's important to talk about one of my favorite endangered species, manatees. But also, we're going to be talking about another endangered species, Marco Rubio and DeSantis, and where they play in all of this. They've been missing. Rubio's been missing for sure. And we need to address a lot of the social injustices that are occurring within our environment as well. So I'm glad to be here, ready to talk about it. And I'll pass it back to you, Jack, if you're ready.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody. So, I have a couple of slides here talking about sort of the state of manatees and stuff like that. And so I wanted to just go ahead and just like dive into what's the state of of manatees here in the state of Florida, right? This is one of our most iconic animals that we have here in Florida. And 2021 is, I know especially people on the East Coast and certainly those on the West Coast know during 2021 there was an unprecedented amount of the manatees that died, right? Like more than double the 5-year annual average. And those 937 manatees represented 10% of the animal's population in the state. 10% obviously of a sort of a small amount of animals is a huge amount. And it's really scary. And we've seen and we know that it's mostly due to this ongoing water quality problems that have led to like widespread loss of seagrass. They're like preferred food. They always just sit away and they munch on that seagrass, and that's one of the things that we love to just like watch them be able to do, because they're the gentle giants of the sea, right? That's how we sort of see them. And they also face threats from like toxic blooms of red tide, which like was really bad in 2021. I know here in the Tampa Bay, there was it was one of the worst I've ever seen, frankly. They also face lots of threats from like habitat loss and like boat strikes as well. So I just wanted to put a question to the panel, just about like sort of that red tide in general, and I just wanted to get like what was your sort of all of y'all's recollection of like the red tide that's been happening, not only last year but just sort of the last couple of years, because we know like it's getting worse, right? It's not, red tide isn't going away, it's increasing in frequency, it's increasing in sort of the severity, right? So yeah, if anybody could just sort of talk about how they've seen that affect their communities, especially because we're a seafaring state, right? We love to our recreation in the water as well. But yeah, if anybody feels like they'd be comfortable speaking on that, please go ahead. I will say I know here in the Tampa Bay area, right? Like, we had just like tons of like dead fish just like popping up like on the sort of shores of St. Petersburg where I live. And like the city spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars just to spend up cleaning up dead fish that was sort of like on our beach, right? On our seashores. And we rely on a lot of tourism, right? As a state, of course. And that's like such an important part of what people come to Florida for, is this like pristine sort of like ocean environment and lake and freshwater environments. And so yeah, we know that that this is a problem, and that it's being caused by people, right? And so it's just really, it's really disheartening when you see people like Rubio and DeSantis, and then just their sort of inaction on all this stuff, right? Like they don't want to address like the increasing amounts of pollution in our water, right? The water quality problems that we've had, right? That same pollution contributes to increasing those toxic blooms of red tide. Of course, like habitat loss, especially Juan, I know you're down there in South Florida, the Everglades, right? We're going to get on to talk a little bit about the sugar industry as well later. But I know that that's, like that's a place where manatees live too, and we're tearing it down, and we're getting rid of it. There's they have a lot of culpability in that. But yeah, I don't know if anyone would like to add on to what I said there.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a slogan, Red Tide Rick. Seems funny that we don't deal really good with ours here in Florida, right? We have the Ricks, we have the Ronnies, we have the Rona. Yeah, and that was one of the things we hated over here too, was the red tide. Very stink, from what I remember. Again, it had to do a lot with what we were going to jump into here about the climate, right? And the way we were taking care of not only the ocean, but the environment. When the ocean gets too warm, it causes so many problems. And so that's what we saw with red tide. And then we also saw a legislation that did not recognize, the devastation that was bringing. And it's sad because they're supposedly, allegedly from Florida, but I definitely do remember red tide, um, having that red tide here, and how much it just hindered everybody's day to day, especially beachgoers and people that are on, the coast.
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump in and ask Kat. I know that you and your fellows have been working on sort of a project about the manatees, and I wanted to ask if you could share a little bit about, sort of what y'all are doing and what that's all about.
Yeah, for sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're really focused here at Our Climate about tapping into the power of storytelling. And I will say that I have, fellows who have also like been in the Tampa Bay area. There's one that like really sticks in my mind who was very into marine biology and was just absolutely devastated by seeing red tide in her community. I think it's a really radicalizing force to see, you know, life literally being choked out in your own community and thinking about what the repercussions of this and how this is going to like impact the actual people in these communities if we allow things like this to continue going on and again like don't really tackle the root of the problem here. It feels apocalyptic almost to see just like fish washing up on shore, how you said, Jack, and for there to not really be anything done about it, just kind of, shrug it off. Um, and these are the stories that I think are really, really important to tell. There's like young kids who are seeing this, and this is the world that they're growing up in. And we also work with a lot of people who are like still in high school or even middle school sometimes, and they don't really have the power to vote yet. And so we want to really make it clear that just because some folks are voteless doesn't mean that they're not voiceless. We see these people who are growing up in these impacted communities and seeing effects like red tide throughout their whole lives. And that's such a unique perspective, especially for Gen Z, who is growing up and seeing all of these atrocities and feeling kind of helpless. They are just kind of born into this world where they're seeing so much climate anxiety. And so that's what our project is really taking an aim at, is telling those stories. So our project is pretty much this giant manatee mosaic where we have people from all over Florida use recyclable material, usually like 1 foot by 1 foot cardboard pieces, and they can draw or paint or collage a little piece of their climate story onto this tile, whether it's some things that they have experienced in their communities, what climate justice means to them, what they stand to lose, a message to our elected officials. And we collect these tiles from all over Florida and then use them to build a giant mosaic, and it's of a manatee. As we said earlier on this call, we know manatees, gentle sea giants, are very well loved in Florida. I think they're so representative of all this beautiful wildlife we have to lose. They're very charismatic and universally loved and now endangered. I think that that's something that speaks to a lot of the population of Florida who have grown up seeing manatees, when they go out to like the springs or even the ocean. So this manatee mosaic is really meant to show how big of an impact we can make when we all come together. Last year was the first year that we did this project, and our manatee was approximately 20 feet long, with over 300 tiles. And so we're launching this project again this year, and we're really, really excited to see it come together. We have a couple of students working from all over the state, being community leads. We have folks in South Florida and Sarasota and Tallahassee. And so we're really hoping to see an even bigger project this year that really shows how big an issue this is to Floridians.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for that rundown. I'm really excited to see, what y'all come up with, and like that's a huge mosaic too. So, really excited to see this sort of year's works, right? And I did want to pivot a little bit over to Suhan, and I know that you're an environmental organizer, and not only does like obviously climate degradation hurts like the wildlife and stuff like that, but it hurts us like as people, right? And we know that the people who it affects the most, climate degradation, degradation, right, and sort of pollution. This often ends up in marginalized communities. It ends up in people's of colors communities, right? This sort of pollution, whether it be from the air pollution, whether it be water pollution. And so I just wanted to talk to you, or I guess ask a question. around, like, would you say that like environmental justice is like racial justice? Is it, is this a fight, an intersectional fight, as well as not, just other than just being, this is only environmental stuff? Like, is this an intersectional fight, I guess is what I'm asking.
This is an intersectional fight because the way that, for example, trash dumps are created, the areas where there is more air pollution are always in communities of color, and it's always communities of color who have to bear the brunt of that. And then these communities of color, low income communities, not only are they affected by that, they're also affected by, for example, extreme heat. And so it disproportionately affects communities of color because communities of color are more often outside for their jobs. They work in outdoor conditions. So all of these heat strokes, for example, disproportionately affect communities of color as well. So all of these are intersectional issues. We don't really have any protocols like health-wise as a state to deal with extreme heat. Also, with air pollution, water pollution, that also disproportionately affects communities of color and low-income communities, and also vulnerable communities like the elderly, like the pregnant. And so we need to ensure that we protect our local populations, and we're not doing that right now. They're more so focused on, okay, so if there's a flood, let's just patch it up, or if there's a hurricane, then let's focus on like reconstruction. But there's no, like how we were talking about earlier, there's nothing preventative. And then people of color are the people who have to bear the brunt of there not being these protocols in place.
Absolutely. There is such things as climate racism. And if you don't, Martin Luther King said it the best, it's like economic justice is tied into social justice. Systematically, we do see, again, like Suhan said, you see, you go into the more impoverished neighborhoods, you see dumps within these neighborhoods. You also see, trash not collected. You see a lot more pollution, a lot more, just not being taken care of, a lot of runoff in these neighborhoods. And so you do see a very, very, very close tie to, climate racism, and also, social racism, very much so tied together. You see them systematically, just treat these communities like they don't exist. Like Suhan said, no preventative measures for hurricanes. The infrastructure is poor in a lot of these neighborhoods. Buildings are old. And so we need to recognize that they are very much so tied together, Jack. And how do you do that is a good question, but I think we're on the right path by informing the community and informing the public. The public has to know before we can take action, to be properly informed.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate both of y'all's sort of comments there. I just want to tell a short sort of anecdote about, the place where I live, St. Petersburg, right? There's a historic Black population that lives in St. Petersburg, for hundreds of years, right? And one of the places that was sort of a longtime neighborhood here in St. Petersburg, Black neighborhood, it was called the Gas Plant District. And I may be telling on myself a little bit about where I'm going with this, but it was called the Gas Plant District for a reason, right? There was a reason why the sort of the industry, the literal gas plants were placed in the Black community, right? Because it's seen as like as a dumping ground, right? Like this is a place where it's okay, that we're able to put like the dirty, like all of our trash, all of our our sort of dirt, and it brings down not only like obviously the health and the wellness of the people who live there, but it makes their neighborhoods worse, and makes their communities worse. And that's environmental racism, and it's just clear, obviously. It's obviously an intersectional issue. And yeah, I'm just glad to be able to hear sort of what you all have to say about it, because it's a big problem, especially here in Florida. It's a big problem. But yeah, we could probably move on to sort of the next point. And that, I wanted to talk a little bit about Rubio specifically, right? And go down a little bit south towards, where Juan lives, around in South Florida. It's about the Everglades, right? And this is sort of about like sort of environmental degradation. And, like we know that he's received many donations over the years from lots of different corporations, obviously. But one of the ones that we wanted to highlight here is the Fanjul Corporation, which is a sugar producer based in Florida. And if you're, sort of unaware, Florida produces so much sugar for especially the country, right? And there has to be a physical place where all that sugar is produced, and that often comes in, basically taking over parts of the Everglades, parts of like very sensitive sort of environmental place, and sort of really important for the health of our state, of just sort of our ecosystem, our hydrological system, right? Just how the water flows in our state. Everglades is such an important part of that. And Florida Crystals, a subsidiary of Fanjul Corporation, has given Rubio over $120,000 just in the 2020 campaign cycle alone. They love to give out to Marco Rubio. We know that he's basically one of their favorite people to give money to, because they know that he's gonna, when it comes time to vote on sort of regulating the sugar industry here in Florida, that he's gonna vote the way that they want to, right? That's the point of these political donations, and unfortunately, it's just it's part of a wider problem, but it's something that we've seen sort of like really intensely down there in South Florida. Watt, I don't know if you have any stories, but it seems like the sugar corporations down there have been sort of a menace for a long time.
Well, no doubt. And it's not just the sugar industry that he's in bed with. I'm sure if you go down to the port, you'll find that they have investments in the port, which a lot of the pollution comes from, ships, the way that they are handling their fuel. And so you have things in place where, systems in place where there's supposed to be checks and balances. And so a lot of his antics, or his inability to govern, or to look over us, have resulted in large scale pollution. The sugar company is one of those big corporations, of many again, that do invest into Rubio. But I like to say again, like it's you were talking about him showing up to that vote. One of few, right? Probably will be one of the few that he does show up to. But it just boils down to having viable leadership who recognizes that this is a crisis, right? Beyond the manatees, a large portion of Florida survives off the waterways, right? So just like the housing crisis, it's a crisis. Just like everything that's going on here is becoming a crisis. Inflation is a crisis. Climate justice is a crisis right now in Florida, right now in our nation. And Rubio, we need leaders aside from Rubio and Scott, because they've done little. We don't expect them to do much more. We really need to give them their pink slips and bring in new leadership.
For sure, absolutely. And yeah, this slide sort of talks about a lot of the stuff that I mentioned earlier, right? But that lack of regulations, right, affects all sorts of like endangered and non-endangered animals, obviously, like including us, right? We're part of the ecosystem. We are animals too, right? And I think oftentimes we sort of forget that we're all part of this really complex and intelligent system that we have to respect, and we have to make sure that we take care of, because we've only got one Earth, right? We've only got this planet that we live on, this wonderful state that we live in, and yeah, it's just really frustrating to see sort of these politicians basically not listen to the demands of the people, and that's like one of the biggest sins I think you could really have as a politician. But yeah, so I guess we've sort of talked about a lot of the sort of more negative realities of what we see, but I just wanted to ask, like, what can we do, right? And like, how do we stop this stuff, right? There needs to be sort of a call to action here, right? How do people get involved? How do people sort of affect change, right? And so, yeah, like there's lots of good legislation that can affect change around all of these different things, right? That is not the problem. We know there are solutions that exist. We need the right people in office who are going to, put those changes into motion, right? And that's where basically the work of all of us basically comes in, right? Especially not only on this call specifically, but everybody watching at home. Like Juan said, we need to be giving those pink slips out, like to Marco Rubio and to Ron DeSantis. And like that's the most important thing, right? We need people in office who are going to affect the change that we want to see. And these chumps aren't doing it, right? That's just clear to see. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that change is possible, and we can affect this change, right? And not to get too despondent about sort of the future of the world, because like I'm maybe an optimist, but I think this is important that we talk about sort of the ways that we can affect change, and that's about getting organized, right? And so I don't know if maybe Suhan or somebody else would like to talk about sort of how they're organizing around climate or sort of the environment, and sort of to affect that political change. But yeah, anyone, please go ahead.
Yeah, so also to add on to a point earlier, so on air pollution as well, Marco Rubio and all of these, a lot of the large politicians, they also take a lot of fossil fuel money, and it very negatively impacts the environment. It's one of the biggest causes of global warming. It's one of the biggest causes of warming in our state. And so, yes, I do believe that we need to have a referendum on all of these, on all of our politicians. We need to vote them out, a lot of these politicians. And how do we convince people to vote them out is through voter education. So personally, I've been trying to do social media organizing through social media, also informing high school students locally so that when they reach their age, they can vote for the right people for that, really suit our interests, our state's interests, our community's interests, and not just big money, big donors. We really need to ensure that we vote for the right people. And this is an election year, so we need to make sure to really educate voters on the differences, because there's large differences.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like we know, right? Like organized groups of people, like or the organization of the working class around sort of a lot of key demands, like that's what affects change, right? And we can get that change politically through through basically organizing ourselves, right? We're the people of Florida. We got to organize ourselves. We got to be like, hey, like we're not taking this anymore. You know what I mean? And we can change this state. I 100% believe that, and I think that's just one of the most important things to sort of leave our audience with. But that sort of is bringing our conversation closer to a close. I just wanted to just sort of talk about a little bit what For Our Future is doing, right? We do a lot of accountability calls to Marco Rubio, right, as sort of a weekly thing. And right now it's about housing, but if you wanted to call Marco Rubio and talk about the environment too, that'd be wonderful. Like we need all sorts of folks who are energized by all sorts of different topics to get organized around, right? And so I put sort of the different sorts of Facebook groups and Facebooks of the different organizations here. But yeah, this is a perfect time for anyone to sort of shout out stuff that they're doing that they'd like to maybe inform people on, or just yeah, any sorts of call to actions. This is the time for it.
Yeah, as I mentioned, our climate is going to be starting up our manatee mosaic soon. That should be being unveiled sometime this month to be built in August. I also really recommend following our Instagram at our climate Florida or our climate FL. We are also planning on doing a lot of mobilizing around this election year, informing people on certain ballot measures, climate report cards. We are a 501c org. We're not going to tell you who to vote for, but I think we will just let the facts speak for themselves. And I'd also just want to say thank you to all the organizers here, and that it's really important that we're doing what we're doing and educating the public, following the money, getting the facts out there. And feeling so grateful to have been a part of this. Thank you.
Absolutely, for sure. Thank you. And I'll, what we're doing here at For Our Future, like Jack said, is we're doing accountability calls into Rubio and DeSantis and Scott every week, having voters directly patch into their voice message system, letting them know that, hey, the rent is too damn high. Hey, we need to respect our women. Hey, we need you to get the hell out. A number of things we're saying on these phone banks throughout the week. We'd love to have you. But I just wanted to talk to the Gen Zs, the Gen Xs, the millennials, the alphas who are coming up. I hope you're inspired, not by our actions that we have set forth, right? This is not a gang. The politics is not a gang, blue and red. The things that we are battling are life-changing, life-altering, right? Your housing, your right to education and what you're supposed to learn, your right to vote. Tell these stale old fogies that you're tired of stale politics, right? How can you go and live on Mars or live in all these different planets if you can't even protect or take care of your own, right? What does human rights look like to a type 1 civilization who's now often settled different colonized in different civilizations and different planets? How does that exist in the world that we live in right now? I tell you, it doesn't, right? And so we, the people, right? Organizers, moms, dads, students, we have to get activated. And we definitely have to start reaching out with our eyes closed and our hearts open. And I'll leave you guys with that. I thank you to the audience. Thank you to our guest, Suhan, Kat. It was awesome. I had a good time. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you so much for the invite. So my org is also a big voter registration organization. So making sure to go out into communities of color and register voters, super important. Also voter education is another big thing that I've been working on. And what gives me a lot of hope working with young people is the passion that young people have for climate justice and environmental justice. It really gives me hope that for the future of our state. And I really would like to do a call to action to everyone on this call. Please educate yourself on who you vote for in November. I know a lot of the times people only look at the top, the governor, but every single slot on your ballot is important. Make sure to please research. Probably all of our orgs will probably have some voter information involved in that. But researching every single slot on your ballot is so important, please. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody who's been here today, everybody watching at home. Thanks a lot. And yeah, thank you for turning out. And yeah, thanks for this great conversation. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And everyone have a great rest of your day.